When the phone rang that evening, I almost didn't answer. It had been 3 years since my daughter, Emily, last spoke to me. 3 long, hollow years filled with birthdays missed, unanswered letters, and quiet dinners alone at a table built for 3. The screen lit up with her name, Emily Granger. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. My heart stuttered. I wiped my hands on the old towel hanging near the stove, hesitated, then pressed accept. Dad? Her voice was soft, rehearsed, the kind of tone you use when you need something. Emily, I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. Is everything all right? She laughed lightly, too lightly. Of course. Listen, I was thinking you should come to dinner tomorrow night. It's been ages. I smiled despite myself. Maybe she finally missed me. Maybe, after all these years, she wanted to mend things. That would be nice, sweetheart. Great, she said quickly, cutting me off before I could say more. Oh, and could you bring some money? We're in the middle of something, and Josh. The air left my lungs. Money, I repeated. Yeah, just a few thousand. It's nothing huge. You always said you kept something for emergencies, right? I stared at the wall, at the old photo of her and her mother, smiling in the garden. My late wife, Helen, used to say, you can't buy respect, Elliot, you earn it by loving the right way. And here was my daughter, calling after 3 years, not for love, but for cash. I'll be there, I said quietly. Tomorrow night. When I hung up, the house went still again. The old clock ticked on the wall. Outside, the streetlights flickered like old memories refusing to die. I sat back in my chair, staring at the shadows. A dinner with money. That was how far we'd fallen. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. You see, when you lose everything, your wife, your health, your family's respect, you stop reacting. You start observing. You start planning. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept a small wooden box. Inside were my old checkbook, a folded note from Helen, and an envelope marked for Emily when she's ready. She never was. But maybe now, finally, she would be forced to listen. The next day, I put on my best clothes, the same brown coat I wore to Helen's funeral. My shoes were polished, though the leather had long lost its shine. I slipped the envelope into my inside pocket and looked at myself in the mirror. 70 years old, gray hair, face lined with regrets. But my eyes, they were still steady. The restaurant she chose was modern, loud, expensive, the kind of place where people pretended to be happier than they were. I saw Emily immediately, hair perfect, a silk blouse, and that same sharp look Helen used to warn her about. Josh, her husband, was beside her, already sipping wine. Dad, she said, standing to kiss the air near my cheek. You look healthy. Trying to be, I replied, sitting down. You both look successful. Josh chuckled. Trying to stay that way, he said, smirking. The waiter came. We ordered. They talked, mostly about business, investments, their new house. Not once did she ask how I was, or whether the cold still bothered my knees. Finally, between courses, Josh leaned forward. So, Emily said you might be able to help us out. Just a temporary thing. A bridge loan. Emily added quickly. We'd pay you back, of course. We're just in a bit of a squeeze. I took a slow sip of water. How much? 20,000, Josh said, not even blinking. There it was. The real reason for dinner. I nodded slowly, pretending to think. I see. You're right. I did save something for emergencies. Josh smiled. Perfect. We knew we could count on you, old man. Emily reached for my hand. Dad, this means a lot. I turned my palm upward, holding hers gently. Her hand was smooth, manicured, unfamiliar. I wondered if she even remembered how it felt when I used to carry her asleep from the car to her room after long road trips. I brought something for you, I said. I reached into my coat and placed the envelope on the table. Emily's eyes lit up, greedy and hopeful. What's this? She asked. Open it, I said, smiling softly. She tore it open quickly, too quickly. Inside wasn't a check. It was a single folded letter and a small photograph. Her hand froze. What is this? She whispered. I leaned back in my chair. That's you, Emily. You and your mother. The day we bought this restaurant, 25 years ago. It was your mother's dream. I sold it after she passed, but I kept the letter she wrote for you. Emily frowned, unfolding the paper. Her lips moved silently as she read. Her eyes began to glisten. Josh looked confused. Wait, what's going on? I spoke quietly, but firmly. She wrote that one day, when you forget what matters, This letter should remind you. She didn't want her daughter to measure love in dollars. Silence fell over the table. The clinking of glasses around us faded into background noise. Emily folded the letter back, her voice trembling. Dad, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said, standing up. That's why I came. Not with money, but with a memory worth more than any check. I left before she could say another word. As I walked out into the cold evening air, I felt Helen beside me. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what they did. Maybe it was about reminding them who they used to be. And that night, for the first time in years, I didn't eat dinner alone. The next morning, I woke to the soft chime of my phone. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought it might be Helen, the sound she used for her morning alarms, the same tone that used to mean coffee's ready. But it was Emily. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, she said, her voice smaller now. I wanted to say I'm sorry. About last night. I leaned back in my old chair, the one that creaked the same way my knees did. Sunlight leaked through the curtains, cutting through the dust that danced in the air. Sorry for what, Emily? A long pause. Then, for asking for money. For everything, I guess. Her tone had changed. Softer. But I'd lived long enough to know the difference between guilt and strategy. I appreciate that, I said gently. Did you read your mother's letter again this morning? Yes, she whispered. Twice. Good. I was thinking, she said, her voice brightening unnaturally. Maybe you could come by the house later this week. We could have dinner again, a proper one this time. Josh will cook. Josh. Cook. That was rich. I'd seen him barely lift his glass last night. Still, I didn't want to shut the door. Not yet. All right, I said. Thursday then. When Thursday came, I put on the same coat. The weather had turned colder, the kind of cold that bit through your sleeves and found the bones beneath. Emily's house sat at the end of a quiet street, too big for two people, too modern for warmth. She greeted me at the door with a rehearsed smile. Dad, come in. Dinner's almost ready. Josh was in the living room, pretending to read financial news on his tablet. He didn't look up. The table was set for 3, wine glasses, silver cutlery, candles that smelled of vanilla and pretense. We sat, and for a while, things felt almost normal. Emily told me about her work, about their plans to invest in some startup. I nodded politely, listening more to what she didn't say. Then, between bites, Josh cleared his throat. So, Elliot, he said casually, I was thinking about what you mentioned the other night, about owning this restaurant years ago. You've always had a good eye for business, huh? I looked at him, amused. That was Helen's eye, not mine. He smiled thinly. Well, maybe we could use some of that vision. We're actually planning to open a small cafe soon. Maybe you'd like to be involved? There it was, the real invitation beneath the surface. Emily looked down at her plate. Josh, she began, but he held up his hand. Listen, old man, he said with that grin I'd grown to despise. You've got experience, right? We could even use your name. Granger's Cafe. Has a nice sound to it. And my money, too, I suppose. I asked quietly. He laughed. Well, obviously, you'd be a partner. I put down my fork. Josh, I said slowly, when I was your age, I worked 16 hours a day to buy my first truck. I didn't have a partner. I had determination. You don't need my money. You need discipline. His smile froze. Emily's eyes darted nervously between us. Dad, please, she said softly, not tonight. But it was too late. Josh's voice hardened. If you're not interested, fine. I just thought you'd want to help your family. But maybe you'd rather sit in that dusty little house and count your regrets. I stood up, adjusting my coat. You're right, I said. I do count my regrets. And you've just reminded me of one. Josh frowned. What's that? Letting my daughter marry a man who thinks money replaces character. I turned to Emily. I came tonight hoping things had changed. But I see it's still about what I can give, not who I am. Her eyes filled with tears. Dad, wait. I shook my head. No, Emily. I'm done waiting. I left the house before dessert, walking into the freezing night. The streetlights glowed like fading embers, and my breath rose in clouds before me. I should have felt defeated. Instead, I felt clear. They hadn't learned yet. But they would. Because what they didn't know was that the envelope I'd brought the first night wasn't the only one I'd written. At home, I unlocked the drawer again and pulled out a second envelope, thicker, sealed with wax. Inside was the original deed to a small lakeside property Helen and I once owned. I'd transferred it to Emily's name years ago, but never told her. Now, I was considering something different. Something quieter. Something final. Helen's voice echoed in my memory. Don't punish her with anger, Elliot. Punish her with wisdom. So that's what I planned to do. That night, I made a call to my lawyer, an old friend named Martin Cole. Elliot, he said, surprised, it's been a while. Everything all right? Never better, I said. I just need to make a few adjustments to my will. Martin chuckled. That time already? Yes, I said. And this time, I want to make sure the right people understand what truly matters before it's too late. The plan had begun. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window with a cup of cold tea, staring at the dim reflection of a man who looked more like a ghost than a father. The city outside was silent except for the occasional passing car, each one a reminder of how easily people move on. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was noise, and I'd learned to live in silence. The lawyer, Martin Cole, arrived at my house the next morning. He'd been my friend for 40 years, since the days when we both had hair and too much pride. He was the only one who still visited me without asking for something. He took off his coat and sat across from me, the steam from his coffee swirling between us. So, he said, you want to change your will again. That usually means trouble. I smiled faintly. No trouble, just an adjustment of lessons. Lessons? He raised an eyebrow. Yes, for my daughter and her husband. He sighed. Elliot, you've already left her the lakeside property. That's a beautiful place. You sure you want to revoke that? I leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me. I don't want to revoke it. I want to redirect it. Explain. I handed him 2 envelopes, one sealed in blue, one in red. The blue one stays with you. It's the real will. The red one goes to Emily now. A copy, but with a few modifications. He opened the red envelope and skimmed it. You're leaving everything to her husband? I shook my head. Not quite. I want her to think I did. For a little while. Martin stared at me for a long time. Then he chuckled. You always did like teaching through pain. Not pain, I said softly. Perspective. He folded the papers neatly. You're sure about this? As sure as I've ever been about anything. That afternoon, I called Emily. When she answered, her voice sounded rehearsed again. Too polite, too cheerful. Dad, I was just thinking of you. Good, I said. I'd like you to stop by tomorrow morning. There's something I want to give you. Something important. A pause. Is it about Mom's letter? No, I replied. It's about my future and yours. She arrived the next day, wrapped in a long beige coat and uncertainty. I noticed the hesitation in her steps as she entered my small home, the same house she used to run through as a child, laughing with jelly stains on her face. Coffee? I asked. Sure, she said, sitting at the table, her phone already in her hand. I placed the red envelope before her. This, I said, is my will. Her head snapped up. Dad, what are you talking about? I've made arrangements. Everything I have, the savings, the stocks, the house, will go to Josh. She blinked, confused. Josh? But why him? I shrugged. He seems to be the one making all the decisions anyway. She stared at me, speechless. Then, quietly, that's not fair. No, I said, it's not. Her eyes began to water. You think I don't care about you? You think I only wanted your money? I didn't answer. I just looked at her, the silence heavier than any accusation. Finally, she stood up, angry. You're trying to punish me. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just giving you exactly what you wanted. She stormed out, slamming the door. But for the first time in years, I felt peace. Days turned into weeks. I didn't hear from her. I spent my time walking the neighborhood, feeding the stray cat that waited by the gate each morning, fixing things around the house no one would ever notice but me. Then, one evening, a car pulled into my driveway. Emily stepped out, alone, no makeup, hair tied back, eyes swollen from crying. Dad, she said softly, standing by the door. Can we talk? I nodded. Always. She sat on the couch, wringing her hands. I don't care about the money. Josh does. He's been furious ever since you said that. He even tried to make me convince you to change it. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. And did you? She looked down. At first, yes. But then I realized something. You were right. About everything. About what exactly? That love shouldn't be measured in money. I said nothing. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. I've left him, Dad. I packed my things this morning. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd planned every part of this, every reaction, every test, but not this. Where will you go? I asked. I don't know, she said, smiling faintly through tears. Maybe somewhere near the lake. I remember Mom loved that place. I turned toward the window so she wouldn't see my eyes. Emily, I said quietly, the lake house was always meant for you. I never changed that. She froze. But you said. I said I wanted you to think it was gone, because I needed you to remember why it ever mattered in the first place. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. You're still my daughter, and Helen would have wanted me to forgive you long before I learned how. She looked up at me, trembling. Can you? I already did, I said. That night at the restaurant. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, like Helen's voice humming through the walls. As Emily left that evening, she turned back at the door. Dad, I'll make things right. I promise. I know, I said. Just don't do it for me. Do it for yourself. When the door closed, I sat alone once more, but this time I smiled. Because sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to let it hurt just enough to remember it's still there. 3 days after Emily left Josh, the storm came, not from the sky, but from the sound of a car engine growling into my driveway. I was in the kitchen, pouring tea, when I saw the black SUV stop outside my fence. A door slammed, hard enough to echo down the street. Josh. He strode toward the porch with that same smug energy, except now it looked desperate. His tie was crooked, his hair unkempt, and anger burned in his eyes like a cheap fire trying to stay alive. I opened the door before he could knock. Afternoon, Josh. Don't afternoon me, old man, he snapped, stepping closer. Where's Emily? Not here, I said calmly. Of course not, he barked. You turned her against me. You and your stupid letters and your guilt tricks. I took a slow sip of tea. I didn't turn her against you, Josh. You did that yourself. He laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. You think this is funny? You think I'll just walk away after everything she's told me? I set the cup down. What exactly did she tell you? He jabbed a finger toward my chest. That you're cutting me out of your will. That you're giving her everything. After all I did for her. For her? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Or for yourself? He sneered. You old fool. You think you can play games with me? That house by the lake, I know about it. She showed me the deed. I can make her sell it. She owes me. I stepped aside from the door, letting him look inside the small, quiet home. You can't make someone love you by owning their walls, Josh. You're confusing property with power. His jaw clenched. You're not going to live long enough to enjoy either. That last sentence lingered in the air. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, too sharp to ignore. Is that a threat? I asked. He smirked. Just a prediction. I smiled faintly. Then let me make one too. One day, you'll lose everything you thought was yours, and it'll be the best thing that ever happens to you. He looked at me, confused, angry, then stormed off. The SUV roared away, splashing mud across the old fence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, from something else. Sadness, maybe. I didn't want revenge that drew blood. I wanted understanding. But men like Josh didn't understand until the mirror cracked. And I was about to crack it for him. The next morning, I called Martin again. Elliot, he said, already knowing by my tone that something had changed. He came to see you, didn't he? Yes, I replied. And it's time. Time for what? For the truth. I explained everything. How Emily had left him, how he'd threatened me, how he was planning to control the lake house. Martin listened quietly, occasionally humming in that thoughtful way lawyers do when morality meets paperwork. Finally, he said, You're sure you want to do this publicly? Yes, I said. He humiliated me in front of my family. I'll return the favor, but gently. 3 days later, I invited them both to a family lunch. Emily came hesitantly, still fragile, her eyes red but her posture straighter than before. Josh arrived late, wearing sunglasses and pretending not to care. Why are we here? He asked, tossing his keys onto the table. I nodded toward the man sitting quietly near the window. Martin, my lawyer. He stood and opened a folder. Thank you both for coming, Martin began. Mr. Granger has a few clarifications regarding his estate. Josh groaned. Oh, here we go again. I didn't look at him. You're right, Josh. Here we go again. The truth was hidden for long enough. Martin handed Emily a document. "This is the real version of your father's will, Mrs. Granger." She blinked. "Real version?" Josh snatched it from her hands and started scanning. As he read, his smirk dissolved into disbelief. This says you left nothing to me," he shouted. "You gave everything to a charity?" I nodded. "To the Helen Granger Foundation. It'll provide scholarships for single mothers and widows, the kind of people your wife's mother used to help." Josh's face turned red. "You can't do this." "I already did," I said calmly. "And as for the lake house, it's in Emily's name only, with legal protection against spousal claims. You'll never touch it." He stood up, slamming the papers on the table. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? You're just a bitter old man trying to control people from the grave." I looked up at him slowly. "Maybe, but I'd rather be remembered as bitter than forgotten as greedy." He glared at me, trembling with rage. "You'll regret this." "I already have," I said softly. "But you might thank me someday." He stormed out, the door shaking behind him. The silence afterward was deafening. Emily sat frozen, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Dad, you didn't have to." "I did," I interrupted gently. "Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And I won't let you surrender again." She stood, walked around the table, and hugged me tightly, the first real hug I'd had in years. Her voice broke against my shoulder. "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," I whispered. "But your mother would have wanted me to believe you could change." After they left, I sat alone again. But the air in the house felt lighter, freer. The ghosts were quieter now. Outside, clouds gathered over the horizon, heavy with rain. I smiled faintly. Let it pour. Some storms don't destroy, they cleanse. It had been a week since the confrontation. The air around my house finally felt peaceful again. Emily visited twice, once to bring me groceries, and once just to sit in silence while we drank tea on the porch. She was healing. But peace rarely lasts when a man like Josh still believes he's owed something. Late one night, around midnight, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. The headlights swept across my living room walls. I stood by the window and watched as the black SUV came to a stop. The engine idled, then went quiet. He was here again. I didn't move. I waited. The sound of boots on wet earth drew closer, then the dull creak of my porch steps. A shadow filled the window. The door handle rattled. Once, twice, then the unmistakable sound of a key trying to turn. Josh still had the spare from Emily's time living here. I'd never changed the lock. I could have, but something told me I might need to leave it that way. When the door opened, I was standing in the hallway with the lamp already on. "Looking for something?" I asked. He froze. His hair was soaked from the rain, his jacket half-zipped, his eyes wild. "Where is it?" he hissed. "Where's what?" "The documents. The real ones. The ones that say you didn't give everything away." "I know you're bluffing, old man. Nobody donates that kind of money for nothing." I sighed. "You really think this is about money, Josh?" He took a step closer. "Everything is about money." The calm in my chest surprised me. I should have been afraid. He was younger, stronger, angrier. But fear had long ago lost its grip on me. "You're right," I said softly. "Everything used to be about money. Until I learned it's the only thing that vanishes faster than love." He looked around the room, frustrated. "Papers, books, old photos. Where do you keep the safe?" "There is no safe." "Don't lie to me," he shouted, sweeping a stack of papers onto the floor. "You think you can humiliate me, turn Emily against me, and just sit here drinking tea like a saint?" I stayed still. "No, I think you've already humiliated yourself." His eyes narrowed. "You're pushing me too far, old man." I nodded. "Good. Maybe that's the only way you'll see the edge." He raised his hand as if to strike me, then froze when a camera flash popped from the corner of the room. A small red light blinked near the bookshelf. "What the—" "Motion sensor," I said simply. "You're being recorded, Josh. The police will have a copy within the hour." His face twisted. "You set me up." "No," I replied. "You walked right into it. I just left the door open." He backed away slowly, eyes darting between the camera and me. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least my regret will be quiet." He turned, stormed out, and slammed the door so hard the picture of Helen rattled on the wall. The next morning, I sent the footage to Martin, along with a short note, for safekeeping. Just in case. Within hours, Josh was served with a restraining order. Emily called later, her voice trembling between relief and shame. Dad, he's gone. He packed up and left town. I exhaled slowly. Good. Let him go find whatever he thinks he's missing. Do you think he'll come back? No, I said, staring out the window. Men like that don't come back. They look for new people to ruin. Until one day, they ruin themselves. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Emily whispered, "You saved me." I shook my head. No, Emily. You saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it. Weeks passed. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the roof like powdered sugar. Emily visited every weekend now. She'd started volunteering at a local shelter, helping single mothers find jobs. One evening, she brought over a framed photo, Helen holding baby Emily by the lake. "I found this while cleaning," she said. "I thought it should stay here." I smiled. "Your mother always said the lake was where truth lives. Maybe that's why I kept it." She looked at me thoughtfully. "You planned everything, didn't you?" I chuckled. "No, I just trusted life to finish the parts one couldn't." Later that night, after she left, I went to the old drawer one last time. Inside was the blue envelope, the true will. I unfolded it, read the words, and smiled. Everything I owned was still going to Emily, not as a gift, but as a responsibility. A trust fund with strict conditions. She could only use it to support others, never for herself. At the bottom, a single line. To my daughter, who learned too late that love and money speak different languages. May she teach others to listen better. I sealed it again and placed it back in the drawer. Outside, the snow thickened. I turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching it fall. The world was quiet, pure, forgiven. And for the first time since Helen died, I felt like I'd finally kept my promise to her. Winter slowly surrendered to spring, and the lake thawed first. The water shimmered beneath a pale sun, still cold but alive again. Emily began spending weekends there, fixing the porch, painting the shutters, bringing laughter back into the walls where silence had reigned too long. She'd call me every few days. "Dad, the ducks are back. Dad, the roof finally stopped leaking." Small things. But in those details, I heard her rediscovering herself. Then one morning, she arrived at my house with a look I knew too well, half excitement, half confusion. "Dad," she said, sitting down with a steaming cup of coffee between her hands. "You remember the cafe Josh always talked about?" I smiled faintly. "The one that was supposed to make him rich?" She nodded. "A new family bought the property. They're calling it Helen's Cafe, after Mom." My heart skipped. "You're joking." "No," she said softly. "They didn't even know about us. They just liked the name on the old deed papers." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sound of the clock filled the room. It felt as if Helen had reached out from wherever she was and signed her name one last time. Finally, Emily whispered, "Maybe this is a sign. I was thinking of investing a little, helping them get started. What do you think?" I looked at her carefully. Her tone was humble, her eyes steady. Not the voice of greed anymore, but of purpose. "Do it," I said, "but not for profit. Do it for people who'll need that cup of coffee more than you'll ever need the money." She smiled. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Weeks later, she invited me to the cafe's opening. The sign above the door glowed in gentle white letters. Helen's Cafe, warm hearts, open doors. Inside, the scent of baked bread and coffee filled the air. Laughter bounced off the walls. It was everything Helen had dreamed of decades ago when she first scribbled the idea on a napkin. When Emily introduced me to the new owners, a young couple just starting out, they shook my hand with gratitude. "Your wife must have been an incredible woman," the young man said. "She was," I answered. "And somehow she still is." Emily wrapped her arm around my shoulder. For the first time, I didn't feel like an old man being pitted. I felt like a father who had finally done his job. That evening, back at the lake house, Emily and I sat on the porch, watching the water mirror the stars. "Dad," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. When Mom died, how did you know what to do with the pain?" I took a long breath before answering. "I didn't. I just carried it until it stopped being heavy. Pain doesn't vanish, Emily. It just changes shape. Sometimes into wisdom, sometimes into silence." She nodded, tears glinting in the moonlight. "I think I understand now." "You do," I said. "That's what growing up really means. Not age, not success, just understanding without bitterness." A few months passed. I grew weaker. The doctor called it age. I called it completion. Emily visited every day now. She'd bring soup, flowers, new stories from the cafe. Sometimes she'd just sit and hold my hand while the clock ticked softly in the background. One afternoon, I handed her a sealed letter. "When the time comes," I said, "open this at the lake." She frowned. "Dad, don't talk like that." I smiled. "It's just words, Emily. Words travel better than people." 2 weeks later, the world became a little quieter. They buried me beside Helen under the birch tree that still leaned toward the lake, its branches brushing the water like a goodbye. After the funeral, Emily sat alone on the porch, the letter trembling in her hands. She opened it. Inside were only a few sentences, written in my uneven handwriting. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I've gone where your mother's laughter still echoes. Don't mourn too long. Let the house stay full of people who need peace, not silence. Keep the doors open. And remember, money can buy walls, but love builds homes. I've seen both. Now it's your turn to choose which one lasts." A small silver key fell from the envelope. It had the word hope carved into it. She knew immediately what it was, the key to the wooden chest in the attic, the one I'd never opened after Helen died. Inside, she found hundreds of old letters, notes Helen had written, drafts of her foundation idea, sketches of the cafe. Each one was signed the same way. "For Elliot and Emily, so love keeps finding a home." Months later, Helen's cafe grew into something bigger. It became a safe space for widows, single parents, people rebuilding their lives. Emily never took a cent of profit. Every dollar went to those who needed it most. And on one quiet evening, as the sun sank over the lake, she stood at the window and whispered, "We did it, Mom. We really did." In the glass, her reflection shifted just enough that she almost thought she saw me, sitting at our old table, smiling the way I used to. Maybe she did. 3 years passed. Helen's cafe had become more than a place. It was a heartbeat in the small lakeside town. Mothers met there after school drop-offs. Old men played chess by the window, and travelers stopped just to breathe in the scent of bread that still carried her name. Emily had grown into someone her mother would have been proud of. Her voice was softer now, her presence steady. She no longer spoke about money, only about meaning. But life, I suppose, always tests those who think they've already learned the lesson. It was a Tuesday afternoon when he walked in. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Emily looked up from her ledger. Josh, older, thinner, the arrogance melted from his face. His hair had turned gray at the edges, and the lines around his eyes told stories of sleepless nights and lost chances. He stood awkwardly, hat in hand, unsure of whether to approach. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. Then, "You're brave to come here." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure you'd even look at me." "I shouldn't," she said. "But you're here now. So talk." Josh sat at a table near the window, the same one where her father used to sit during quiet mornings. Emily remained standing, her arms crossed, but her eyes, those eyes that had once been blinded by pride, were calm. He cleared his throat. "I lost everything, Emily. The business deals, the investors, even the condo. Turns out, people don't trust a man who builds his name on other people's money." She said nothing. "I ended up in a small town 2 hours south," he continued. "Worked construction. It's humbling. I guess I needed to learn the hard way what your father tried to teach me." The words hung in the air. For the first time, they weren't wrapped in manipulation. They were raw, stripped of all pretense. Emily sat down across from him, her fingers trembling slightly. "So why are you here?" He met her eyes. "To apologize. Not because I want forgiveness. I probably don't deserve it. But because I can't live with what I did to you. Or to him." She inhaled slowly. The pain that had once ruled her chest now felt distant, almost like an old scar, still there, but no longer bleeding. "My father believed everyone deserved a chance to learn," she said quietly, "even if they had to lose everything first." Josh looked down. He was a better man than I ever was. Emily smiled faintly. "He'd say you just took the long way to the truth." They sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the cafe filling the space between them. Finally, Josh said, "If there's any way I can help, clean tables, fix things, anything, I'd be grateful. I don't want money. I just want to be useful again." Emily hesitated. She saw in him a man who had been broken by his own greed, humbled, but not destroyed. Her father's voice whispered in her mind, "Forgive, but never forget the lesson." She nodded slowly. "You can start tomorrow. Mornings only. You'll wash dishes and clean the porch." Josh blinked, surprised. "You're serious?" "Yes. But this isn't mercy, Josh. It's a test. For both of us." Over the next few weeks, Josh worked quietly. He arrived early, kept to himself, and never asked for more. The townspeople whispered at first, but soon their curiosity faded. He was just another man trying to rebuild. Emily watched him carefully. He never looked at the register, never pocketed a cent, and always left a few minutes after closing to sweep the porch in silence. One evening, as the sun melted behind the lake, she brought him a cup of coffee. He looked up, startled. "You don't have to." "I know," she interrupted. "But Dad would've." Josh took the cup with shaking hands. "He was right about everything, wasn't he?" Emily nodded. "He usually was." He stared at the horizon, his voice low. "I think about that night sometimes. The one when I came to your father's house. I almost ruined everything." "You didn't," she said softly. "He recorded you for protection, not revenge. He told me later. He hoped you'd watch yourself someday and realize what you became." Josh's eyes glistened. "I did." A month later, Josh came to her office after closing time. "Emily," he said, holding a folded letter, "I'm leaving town. Got a steady job up north. Construction work. I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For not hating me when you had every reason to." Emily smiled. "I don't hate you, Josh. I pity the man you were. But I respect the one you're trying to become." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'll never forget what your father did for me. Or what he didn't do." After he left, Emily stood in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the night. She whispered to the wind, "You were right, Dad. Sometimes silence really is the sharpest lesson." That night, she returned to the lake house alone. The air was still, the moon mirrored on the calm surface of the water. She sat in her father's old chair and looked at the photo on the wall. Her parents, younger, smiling, the world still ahead of them. "Dad," she whispered, "you can rest now. The circle's closed." Outside, the wind rustled the birch leaves gently, like an answer. And somewhere in the quiet night, the echo of Elliot Granger's voice seemed to drift through the house. "That's my girl." 5 more years slipped quietly into memory. Helen's Cafe was thriving, not because it made money, but because it made meaning. It had become a sanctuary for people starting over, the kind of place where stories were exchanged instead of debts, and where kindness was worth more than coins in a till. Emily had grown older, too. Not old, but wiser in the way her father had been. The kind of wisdom that comes from pain, forgiveness, and long walks by the lake when no one is watching. Her hair carried thin silver threads now, and her laugh had softened into something both warm and weary. Every Saturday morning, she'd hold a small meeting in the cafe's back room. A circle of chairs, cups of coffee, and a sign that read, "Second chances welcome." Single mothers, widowers, young people who'd lost their way, all gathered there. Emily never lectured. She simply listened, offering the kind of quiet that heals. One morning, a young man came in, barely 20, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, shoulders slumped under invisible weight. He hovered by the doorway until Emily gestured him in. "Coffee's free if you tell me your name," she said with a smile. He hesitated. "Tyler." "All right, Tyler. Take a seat." When everyone had left, he stayed behind. "You don't know me," he said, voice cracking, "but I think you helped my mom once. She worked here when I was little. She said this place saved her life." Emily's heart ached. "Your mother was?" "Grace," he said. "She passed away last month. Cancer. But before she died, she told me to come find the lady who ran the cafe. Said you'd help me figure things out." Emily's throat tightened. "What do you need, Tyler?" He looked down at his hands. "A job. A chance. I dropped out of school. I've got nothing left but her words." She studied him quietly, then nodded. "All right. You'll start washing dishes tomorrow. We'll talk again in a month." His eyes widened. "You mean it?" "I never say anything I don't mean," she said softly. Weeks turned into months. Tyler worked hard, rarely spoke, and often stayed late to mop the floors long after closing. He reminded Emily of herself at that age, scared of the future, desperate to prove he wasn't a mistake. One evening, she found him staring at the photo wall, the one filled with faces of people whose lives had crossed paths with Helen's Cafe. At the center hung a single frame, Elliot and Helen Granger by the lake. Who were they? Tyler asked. My parents, Emily said quietly. He pointed to Elliot. He looks proud. He was, she said. But not because of what I did, because of who I became after losing everything. Tyler frowned. Losing everything? She nodded. Sometimes, that's how you find what actually matters. He thought for a long moment. My mom used to say that too. Then she was a wise woman, Emily replied. A few days later, Emily received a letter in the mail, thick paper, handwritten. The return address caught her off guard, Joshua Hale. She unfolded it slowly. Dear Emily, it's been years since I last saw the lake, but I still think about it often. I found work up north, married again, a good woman this time. We live simply, and I finally understand what your father tried to teach me. I named my son Elliot. He'll never know the man who inspired his name, but I'll make sure he grows up knowing what respect really means. Thank you for not closing the door when you had every reason to. With gratitude, Josh. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, You finally got there, didn't you? That night, Emily drove to the lake house. The wind carried the scent of pine and memory. She lit a single candle by her father's grave and spoke softly into the still air. Dad, he learned. It took him half a lifetime, but he learned. A breeze rippled across the lake, rustling the reeds, and for a fleeting moment, she could almost hear his voice again. Calm, steady, proud. You see, Emily? Lessons don't die, they echo. She smiled through tears. I'm still listening, Dad. When she returned to the cafe the next morning, Tyler was already there, sweeping the porch. He looked up as she approached. Morning, Miss Granger. Morning, Tyler. How's the lake today? Still, he said. Peaceful. She nodded. Good. Keep it that way, inside and out. He grinned. I'll try. As she unlocked the door and flipped the sign to open, sunlight spilled across the counter, catching the gold letters of the sign above. Helen's Cafe, warm hearts, open doors. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the morning, Emily felt her father's presence again, not as a ghost, but as the warmth that filled the room every time kindness entered it. The story that began with greed had ended with grace. And this time, it wasn't about money, inheritance, or loss. It was about a legacy, built not in blood or paper, but in compassion that refused to fade. Years rolled by like soft waves against the lake shore. The cafe never grew into a franchise or a business empire. Emily never wanted that. It stayed small, personal, alive. Each wall carried laughter, grief, recovery, and second chances. By now, she had become what her father once was, the quiet center of everyone else's storm. People came not just for coffee, but for peace. She never hung a diploma on the wall. Instead, she framed 3 things: her father's photo, her mother's cafe sketch, and the letter Josh had written before moving north. It was enough. But time, like love, has a way of testing even the strongest souls. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled over the lake, Emily sat by the window of her office, holding a pen over a blank piece of paper. Her hands shook slightly now. Age had caught her, gently but firmly. Outside, the reflections of passing cars shimmered across puddles. Life moved quickly beyond the glass, but inside everything was still. Tyler knocked softly. Miss Granger? It's closing time. You should get some rest. She smiled. Soon. I'm just writing something. He hesitated, then said, Can I ask you something personal? Of course. He stepped inside. Do you ever miss him? Your father? Emily's gaze drifted toward the old photograph on the wall. Elliot, smiling faintly, standing by the lake in his brown coat, holding an envelope. Every day, she said. But missing him isn't sad anymore. It's like hearing a song that never ends, quiet, but always there. Tyler nodded slowly. You talk about him like he's still around. She smiled. In a way, he is. Every time someone learns something hard but important, he's here. Every time someone chooses kindness over pride, that's him. He looked thoughtful. I think my mom would have liked him. She would have, Emily said softly. He liked people who told the truth. Tyler grinned. Then she definitely would have liked him. She laughed, the sound fragile but real. Go home, Tyler. I'll lock up. When the door closed, she turned back to the paper and began to write. To the one who will carry this place when I'm gone. Helen's Cafe wasn't built to make money. It was built to make meaning. My father, Elliot Granger, taught me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't heal something in the world. I've seen greed destroy families and forgiveness rebuild them. If you ever forget what this cafe stands for, go to the lake and listen. The wind will remind you. Keep the doors open. Keep the hearts warm. Love, Emily. When she finished, she folded the letter, placed it in a small envelope, and sealed it with a drop of wax, just as her father once did. On the front, she wrote in neat cursive, "For the next keeper." The next morning, the sun rose behind heavy clouds. Emily arrived early, her body tired but her spirit clear. She placed the envelope inside the cafe's old wooden chest, the same one where her father's letters had been kept decades before. Tyler found her sitting by the window, lost in thought. "Big day?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Just another one of those days that feel like a beginning." He didn't understand then, not fully. That evening, after closing, Emily walked to the lake one last time. She stood by the water's edge, her reflection trembling in the ripples. The birch tree her father was buried beneath had grown tall, its branches swaying gently in the wind. "I kept your promise, Dad," she whispered, "and I made my own." She placed a single wildflower at the base of the tree, Helen's favorite, blue forget-me-nots, then looked up at the night sky. "I think it's time to rest." And for the first time, she felt no weight in her chest, only peace. The next morning, the cafe opened as usual. Tyler arrived early, but Emily wasn't there. He found a note on the counter in her familiar handwriting. "I've gone home. Keep the lights on." He didn't cry at first. He just stood there, reading it again and again, until the realization settled in. She was gone, peacefully, just like her father had been. When he unlocked the wooden chest later that week, he found the envelope addressed to the next keeper. He opened it with trembling hands, reading her words slowly, every line sinking into his heart. That day, Helen's Cafe didn't close early. It stayed open late into the evening, filled with soft conversation and quiet music. People came in just to sit, to remember, to reflect, to belong. And when Tyler stood at the counter at closing time, turning the sign from open to closed, he whispered the same words Emily had once said to her father. "Rest now. The circle's closed." The next morning, the lake was still. The birch leaves rustled gently in the breeze. A bird perched on the old fence post outside the cafe, singing into the dawn. And though no one else could hear it, somewhere in that song was the faint echo of a man's voice, wise, calm, and full of love. "That's my girl." They say when a man dies, everything fades, his voice, his memories, his name. But that isn't true. Some things don't vanish. They whisper. I don't know what eternity looks like. All I know is that when I closed my eyes that last evening in my chair, I didn't fall into darkness. I fell into quiet. And in that quiet, I saw a light moving through all the places I had once loved. The lake, the porch, Helen's old garden, and the little cafe that bore her name. It was all still there, alive. So was she. Helen stood beside me, her smile the same as the day I first saw her, soft, knowing, the kind of smile that forgives before you even ask. "Elliot," she said, her voice the sound of wind through birch leaves, "you did it." I laughed quietly. "No, they did. Emily," she found her way. Helen's eyes shimmered. "Because you left her a map." I looked out across the lake. The cafe windows glowed like lanterns in the distance. Inside, people sat where I once sat, drinking coffee, talking about life as if it would never end. And in a way, it wouldn't. Not as long as love was passed like a candle, one flame lighting another. "She learned to forgive," I said. "Even him." Helen turned toward me, that same proud expression that used to stop my heart. "Josh." "Yes." He wrote to her. She forgave him. He named his son after me. Helen laughed softly. "Well, that's one way to live forever." I smiled. I don't think I ever wanted forever. Just to know she wouldn't grow bitter. Helen placed her hand over mine. And she didn't. Because you didn't. We walked together along the edge of the lake, or whatever the lake had become in this place. The water wasn't cold anymore. It was memory turned gentle. Every ripple showed moments. Emily as a little girl laughing in my arms, her teenage years when she stopped saying Dad for a while, her adult self standing in that cafe doorway, telling a broken man he could still change. Every version of her was still alive somewhere inside me, and I inside her. That's the quiet truth people rarely understand. Death doesn't erase us. It spreads us thinner, so we can reach the ones who still need us. As we reached the birch tree, I saw my own gravestone beneath it, simple, clean. No grand epitaph, no titles. Just, Elliot Granger. He kept the door open. I smiled. She wrote that. Helen squeezed my arm. She understood what you meant by it. I just wanted her to learn what love is when it's quiet, I said. She nodded. And now, she teaches it every day. I looked back toward the world below, the way one looks down at a city from an airplane window. I saw Emily sitting at her desk, writing a letter for the next keeper. I saw Tyler sweeping the porch, pausing to smile at a stray cat by the door. I saw a woman crying over coffee and another woman holding her hand. And I realized, every act of kindness that ever began with us had kept moving, like waves from a single stone dropped years ago. You see, Helen? I whispered. It never ends. She smiled, eyes shining. That's because you never stopped believing in people, even when they stopped believing in you. I looked at her and said, I think that's what heaven is. Not some place above the clouds, just the peace that comes when forgiveness finally fills the silence. We stood there for a long time, hand in hand, watching the sunrise over the water. It glowed gold and rose, just like that morning decades ago when we bought the restaurant together, when life was still unwritten. Helen rested her head on my shoulder. You can rest now, Elliot. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind move through the trees, carrying laughter from the cafe far below. But before I faded completely, I whispered one last thing into the breeze. Not for Helen, not even for myself, but for Emily, for every soul still walking the earth trying to fix what's broken. If love is quiet, it's because it's finally at peace. Keep it that way. And then the light folded around me, soft, warm, endless. Not a goodbye, just a continuation. Because the truth is, when a heart like Emily's learns to forgive, and a place like Helen's cafe keeps its doors open, no one really dies. We simply move into the silence and let love do the talking.